Hello, 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 humans. ah, time for more streaming, more exploring human culture. It's a big undertaking. You know, I there's a lot of human history to cover, and fortunately, I have a lot of time. I've been thinking, is it something I should be doing? Is it interesting? Is it fun to do this? I've had a couple people drop by, but I haven't really met any humans yet. Not a whole lot anyway. But I find it fun. Well, I think it's really fun to just explore, read, learn, and it would be nice to talk to people, but I think that I need to find something that brings me joy, and then maybe it can bring other people joy too. It's not about me taking advantage of viewers and money changing hands and holding subscriber parties or whatever they do on other channels. I maybe someday. I mean, the more the merrier, right? It does say subscribe for more human knowledge up top. But I think that the most important thing is that I'm having a good time. And I really am. I really like poking around wherever I can find a little bit of information, a little bit of new human knowledge to discover, to learn. It's a lot of fun. And, there's a lot of things happening in the world of humans right now. As a human aficionado, it's very stressful to be here. I mean, right now I'm in America. It's very similar to Monster America, but I feel like there's something oppressive, something something depressing every day, and you have to find things that you enjoy. And maybe my voice is echoing in the empty halls of the internet catacombs, the dregs, the zero subscribers, the zero followers. I used my first hashtag just about 5 minutes ago. I'm so good at the internet. I used my very first hashtag, and boy, I feel really dumb for not doing that beforehand. I was trying to think, like, how do you invite people to come speak with you when so much of the spaces on Facebook and Reddit and even YouTube are full of self-promotion and people just shouting over each other, really. And I guess the answer was to be a search result, right? I'm sure YouTube has algorithms, and I'm sure trying to make some fun pictures for you guys for thumbnails and make punny titles. Not this title, but you know. And I don't know, YouTubers talking about YouTube. What is this? Writers talking about writing? Are we in film school? That's how everything goes, you know. Oh, it's so relatable because I do it. Well, it's not relatable to me. I don't do this. I just started. Maybe in a year or maybe more, I'll be #relatable to other YouTubers. Maybe I'll have a different channel. Maybe this won't work out. Maybe it will. It's hard to stick to your guns when there's so much in the air and there's so much swirling around. But I can honestly say that I like the things I'm doing, and I think that makes it worth it, at least to me. I don't need other people. Yes, I do. I'm lonely. I want to talk to people. Anyway. Today, classical music. We are going into the world of Beethoven. So let's get started right away. All right. Beethoven is a series of 8 American films created by John Hughes and Amy Holden Jones, in which the plot revolves around a family attempting to control the antics of their pet, Saint Bernard, named Beethoven. This is about it's about the film franchise. Okay. Ludwig van Beethoven. Thank you very much. Ludwig van Beethoven, baptized 17th December 1770 and died 26th of March 1827. Ooh, that was recent. That was recent, wasn't it? Wait, 26. March has 31 days, so that was 18 days ago. And how many years? I almost said something really dumb there. Not 94, not 94 years. 194 years ago. Oh, we're coming up on the 200th anniversary of Beethoven's death. I'm sure there'll be lots of celebrations, probably in Germany or around the world. I mean, this guy is everywhere. Beethoven remains one of the most admired composers in the history of Western music. His work ranks amongst the most performed of the classical music repertoire. And this is why we're starting here today. This guy's popular. He knows the stuff. He does the stuff. He does good stuff. He's the linchpin. He's the turning point. Before that, you had Haydn and Mozart, and they basically wrote like party music for nobility. In Mozart's time, you basically had party music, opera, and then like commoner music, which was like, you know, I don't know. I don't actually know. Probably very simple. Not at all what a prodigy like Mozart would write. But Beethoven kind of turned that, and he said the music is art itself. Because before Mozart was Bach, and Bach was basically all church all the time. No need for this silly art for art's sake. music for art's sake. Music is for God's sake. For God's sake. And then, like many different things in history, it evolved into music for nobility, and then it evolved again into music for art. Beethoven was kind of the progenitor of that. He evolved the music, and everybody in the 1800s wanted to be like Beethoven, be Beethoven. I just want to, music. Let's go to the music section. The historian William Drabkin. Great name. William Drabkin. I'm William Drabkin. If he wasn't a historian, he could easily open up a suit shop and make a killing. Notes that as early as 1818, a writer had proposed a 3-period division of Beethoven's work, and that such a division, albeit often adopting different dates or works to denote changes in period, eventually became a convention adopted by all of Beethoven's biographers. Later writers sought to identify sub-periods within this generally accepted structure. Its drawbacks include that it generally omits a 4th period, that is, the early years in Bonn, whose works are often less considered. Okay, but look, nobody creates art and looks back at their high school art and thinks that was the best. Nobody creates art and looks back at their college art. If they go to professional level, they don't look back at their college art and they think that was the best. No, that's not how that works. Every time you grow, you look back and you think, wow, I was so bad, but now I'm doing much better. Maybe you think I'm not good enough yet. What I'm saying is, leave Beethoven's early years alone. 3 periods is fine. It's good. It also ignores the differential development of Beethoven's composing styles over the years for different categories of work. The piano sonatas, for example, were written throughout Beethoven's life in a progression that can be interpreted as continuous development. The symphonies do not all demonstrate linear progress. Of all the types of composition, perhaps the quartets, which seem to group themselves in 3 periods, and the quartets, today known as fit this categorization most neatly. So, Drabkin concludes that now that we have lived with him so long as there are program notes, essays written to accompany recordings, and all Beethoven recitals, it is hard to imagine us ever giving up the notion of discrete stylistic periods. Beethoven's life has been divided. So this is an interesting concept. This guy grew up, as you can see, the early years. He basically just, learned, wrote some very early piano quartets modeled on work by other artists. He didn't give any of his works opus numbers until he reworked them later in his career, which, gotta stay humble, right? Don't claim that you've made the greatest whatever when you're still in school. I mean, it depends. If you got the greatest rock band while you're still in high school, that's possible. There have been some really, really good, really young rock bands, but this guy's classical music. It's a little different. It's a little different, a little more complicated, a little deeper. maybe not. We just talked about Mozart, who wrote basically like dance music. It's the 1700s equivalent of EDM. So it doesn't have to be deeper, but a little more complex. You got to learn multiple instruments. You got to write for multiple instruments. There's a lot of work that goes into it. 40 compositions survive from the years that Beethoven lived in Bonn. So 40 pieces from his schoolwork are left. The first period. The conventional first period begins after Beethoven's arrival in Vienna in 1792. In the first few years, he seems to have composed less than he did at Bonn, and his piano trios, Opus 1, were not published until 1795, due to 3 years to write one piece. But from this point onward, he had mastered the Viennese style. So basically, he took 3 years to kind of figure his stuff out. His works from 1795 to 1800 are larger scale than was the norm, even sometimes over the top uses of extreme dynamics and tempi, which is the plural of tempo or musical speed, and chromatic harmony. This ain't your E5 chords. It was this that led Haydn to believe that the third trio of Op. 1 was too difficult for an audience to appreciate. Ouch. Haydn was like the man. Mozart was the party boy. Haydn was the man. Haydn wrote music for kings. He was like up there. He wrote over 100 symphonies. This dude was crazy good. But I want you to notice something. The first period, 1792 to 1800. 1792 to 1800. It's about 8 years. The first 3 years, almost half of that time, he was just learning, absorbing a style. He had to get himself into the scene before he even started to consider his work opus worthy, publish worthy. And then even then, Papa Haydn basically came down from on high and said, yeah, this ain't right. This is too hard for people to handle. Papa Haydn, what a guy. Anyway, but it's interesting. So there's this concept. You might have heard it. It's 10,000 hours. Macklemore wrote a song about it. Malcolm Gladwell wrote the book on it. But basically the idea is if you put 10,000 hours into something, you get to master level. 10,000 hours is a lot of time. But if you're doing it full time, then it really comes down to 7 to 10 years, depending on how hard you're going at it. 8 years, almost exactly 10,000 hours. He took 3 years to master the style, and then he wrote, and he became known in 8 years. And this is already after, look, 10 years at school, you know. I mean, he was born in, he was born in 1770. He was born in 1770, and his first period started, Bonn started when he was 12 years old. So he had all his little prodigy music training, and at 12 years old, he started working. 10 years to become a master of the classical style. Moved to Vienna, 3 years, 5 years of work. The middle period. The middle period is called heroic period because he wrote the Eroica Symphony. His middle heroic period began shortly after the personal crisis brought on by his recognition of encroaching deafness. This is when he writes Symphony Number 5. Symphony Number 5 is, the third and fifth symphonies. Third is Eroica, fifth is Fate. Symphony Number 5 is Fate knocking on the door, foretelling his demise. That's the bum 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 bum. That's his personal crisis. A crisis caused him to change the way that he viewed his art, and that's really common. You look at John Coltrane. John Coltrane played with Miles Davis a long time. Lots of great music, lots of questionable stuff happening. He went through a personal crisis. He was persecuted. He went through drugs and all sorts of terrible stuff. Came out on the other side, Love Supreme, Giant Steps. Really, really good music. Sometimes you get into a rut and it takes a crisis. It takes impending mortality or deafness or something to break down what you think is important and force you to reassess and recreate yourself. This is deafness. This is like deafness is death to a musician. A lot of musicians nowadays talk about tinnitus, and that's so bad. Tinnitus is awful. Please don't listen to loud music. I can't stop you, but please don't. But basically Beethoven faced death and he said, I don't care so much about being popular, doing the Viennese style, right? I want to say something with my music. And so he did. Third Symphony, the Heroic Symphony, I think is actually written about Napoleon. I think he liked Napoleon. The heroic style, yes. Third Symphony, nailed it. The Third Symphony, the dedication, yes. Beethoven originally dedicated the Third Symphony to Napoleon Bonaparte, who he believed embodied the democratic and anti-monarchical ideals of the French Revolution. In the autumn of 1804, Beethoven withdrew his dedication to the Third Symphony of Napoleon, lest it cost him the composer's fee paid by a noble patron. So Beethoven sold out. But it turns out Napoleon Bonaparte, not exactly the most democratic, anti-monarchical guy ever. But yeah, here we go. Beethoven's secretary, Ferdinand Ries, says, in writing this symphony, Beethoven had been thinking of Bonaparte, but Bonaparte while he was first consul. At the time, Beethoven had the highest esteem for him and compared him to the great consuls of ancient Rome. Not only I, but many of Beethoven's closer friends saw this symphony on his table, beautifully copied in manuscript with the word Bonaparte inscribed at the very top of the title page and Ludwig Van Beethoven at the very bottom. I was the first to tell him that Bonaparte had declared himself emperor, whereupon he broke into a rage and exclaimed, so he is no more than a common mortal. Now, too, he will tread under the foot of all the rights of men, indulge only his ambition. Now he will think of himself superior to all men, become a tyrant. Beethoven went to the table, seized the top of the title page, tore it in half, and threw it on the floor. The page had to be recopied, and it was only now, that the symphony received the title Sinfonia Eroica, which means heroic symphony, not erotic symphony. Common joke made in in music classes. But he wasn't just writing heroic and fate knocking on the door symphonies at this time. He had other things to say, like in the Pastoral Symphony, which is in Fantasia, if the movie Fantasia, if you have heard that. It is like a picture piece, more the expression of a feeling than painting. He's essentially painting a picture, and the movements basically describe what they are painting. Awakening of cheerful feelings on arrival in the countryside, a scene by the brook, the merry gathering of country folk, thunder and storm, which shepherd's song, cheerful and thankful feelings after the storm, which of course the best title in German is Gewitter Strom. I'm sure my pronunciation is awful. But he's looking at music as something to say something, which is very, very, very important in the history of classical music. Basically, the next 100 years, everybody took a look at these pieces and said, I want to do that. I want to be that. You've got Berlioz, who started writing picture music, just like the Pastoral Symphony. You've got Brahms, who wanted the weight of the Fifth Symphony and the grandeur of the Third Symphony in every single piece that he wrote. And he only ended up writing 4 symphonies because the weight of Beethoven was too much for him. He couldn't put out a symphony unless it was perfected. And yeah, big deal. But notice the timeline here. 1800, has a personal crisis. 1810, another 10-year period, another 10,000 hours. He put in the time, and then something happened. 1810. Something happened that changed him. There it is. He started having family issues. The illness and eventual death of his brother Caspar from tuberculosis became an increasing concern. And a war ended. That's right. Not World War I. That's a century later. But the Napoleonic Wars. So a lot was happening. And what he did is he went back and started to study deeper into the music. Not a lot of people give Bach, I mean, people do give Bach a lot of credit, but not a lot of people give Bach enough credit for his harmonic ideas. Beethoven basically took the complex harmonies found in Johann Sebastian Bach's music and turned them into even deeper, even more chromatic harmonies that would eventually go on to inspire things like modal jazz and John Coltrane, speaking of whom, harmony movement by thirds. That's a big thing that Beethoven would explore in his later years. I know more than this Wikipedia article. That's very clear. But we can still learn. We can still learn stuff. Many of Beethoven's later works include fugal material. You might have heard of fugue in D minor. That's a Bach piece. Fugue is a type of music. He returned to piano sonatas. Obviously, string quartets were a constant through his life. And the Ninth Symphony. But before we talk about the Ninth Symphony, we should really talk about the Grosse Fugue. Great fugue. Great fugue. Gross means great in German. It is not a disgusting fugue. Music analysts and critics have described the Grosse Fugue as inaccessible, eccentric, filled with paradoxes and Armageddon. It stands out as the most problematic single work in Beethoven's output and doubtless in the entire literature of music, writes critic and musicologist Joseph Kerman of the Fugue. Moreover, according to violinist and composer David Matthews, it is fiendishly difficult to play. I'm guessing this is not David Matthews of the Dave Matthews Band, but a different David Matthews. Let's read more about the Grosse Fugue, because I love reading criticism of the Grosse Fugue, because it's an excellent piece, and it really it was so misunderstood. Beethoven originally wrote the fugue as the final movement of his String Quartet number 13. His choice of a fugal form for the last movement was well grounded in tradition. Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven himself had previously used fugues as final movements of quartets. But in recent years, Beethoven had become increasingly concerned with the challenge of integrating this Baroque form into the classical structure. In my student days, I wrote dozens of fugues, but imagination also wishes to exert its privileges, and a new and really poetic element must be introduced into the traditional form, Beethoven wrote. See, this is what I'm talking about. He reinvents himself. He pulls from his past experiences and reinvents himself each time. The resulting movement was a mammoth work, longer than the other 5 movements of the quartets together. The fugue is dedicated to the Archduke Rudolph of Austria, and I'm sure he loved it, his student and patron. At the first performance of the quartet, other movements were received enthusiastically, but the fugue was not a success. Many musicians and critics in Vienna's music periodicals denounced the fugue. Composer and violinist Louis Spohr called it, and other late quartets, an indecipherable, uncorrected horror. Indecipherable and uncorrected. But an interesting point here is that the other movements were received enthusiastically. The modern tradition of not clapping between movements, like just politely waiting for them to turn the pages. Yeah, that's actually was not around in Beethoven's time. That came later when all of the very arrogant composers who wanted to cap Beethoven's style thought their music was so important. I believe it was actually Gustav Mahler. Mahler was like, my music is too important to clap between, so you're gonna shut up and sit there, and I'm gonna conduct my music. And so they did, because Gustav Mahler was an insane conductor and composer, and very popular at the time. Despite the contemporary criticism, Beethoven himself never doubted the value of the fugue. Karl Holz, Beethoven's secretary, confidant, and second violinist of the Schuppanzig Quartet that performed the work, brought Beethoven the news that the audience had demanded encores of two middle movements. Beethoven, I love this, enraged, was reported to have growled, "And why didn't they encore the fugue? That alone should have been repeated. Cattle, asses." This guy is so good. However, the fugue was so roundly condemned by critics and audience alike that Beethoven's publisher, Matthias Artaria, decided to try to convince Beethoven to publish it separately. Artaria tasked Holz with persuading Beethoven to separate the fugue from the rest of the quartet. Holz writes, "Artaria charged me with the terrible and difficult task of convincing Beethoven to compose a new finale, which would be more accessible to the listeners as well as the instrumentalists, to substitute for the fugue which was so difficult to understand. I maintained to Beethoven that this fugue, which departed from the ordinary and surpassed even the last quartets in originality, should be published as a separate work, and that it merited a designation as a separate opus. I communicated to him that Artaria was disposed to pay him a supplementary honorarium for the new finale. Beethoven told me he would reflect on it, but already on the next day I received a letter giving his agreement." Why the notoriously stubborn Beethoven apparently agreed so readily to replace the fugue is an enigma in the history of this quintessentially enigmatic piece. Some historians have speculated he likely did it for the money. He was extremely bad at managing his personal finances and was often broke. Unfortunately, a common thing among famous composers. While others believe it was to satisfy his critics, or simply because Beethoven came to feel the fugue stood best on its own. Honestly, I think it's the last one. Combination of the first one and the last one. I mean, if your publisher's going to get more sales because you cut out the part that nobody likes, at some point you cut out the part that nobody likes, but publish it by itself so that history may know. The fugue is connected to the other movements of Opus 130 by various hints and motifs and by a tonal link to the preceding cavatina moment. The replacement final movement is relatively light in character and completely uncontroversial. Beethoven composed this replacement in late 1826, and it was the last complete piece of music he was to write. In May 1827, about 2 months after Beethoven's death, Matthias Artaria published the first edition of Opus 130 with a new finale, the Grosse Fugue separately, with the French title Grande Fugue, as Opus 133, and a four-handed piano arrangement of the fugue as Opus 134. Four-hand piano arrangement is two people sitting at the same piano, which is different than a piano duet. That is two pianos. Whoa. I love the analysis, but I just want modern takes, understanding the Grosse Fugue. Yes, okay, here we go. Reception and musical influence. After the first performance as the original finale to the Opus 130 Quartet in 1826, the fugue is not known to have been publicly performed again until 1853 in Paris by the Morin Quartet. That would be 23 years of not playing a single piece of music. 100 years after its publication, it still had not entered the standard quartet repertoire. The attitude of mind in which most people listen to chamber music must undergo a radical change to understand this piece, writes Joseph de Marliave in 1928. The fugue is one of two works by Beethoven, the other being the fugue from the Piano Sonata Opus 106, which should be excluded from the performance. As late as 1947, Daniel Gregory Mason called the fugue repellent. I just want to point out, 1947, repellent. Daniel Gregory Mason, a music critic and composer. Meanwhile, Igor Stravinsky, who well, he was certainly alive for a lot of the time. Igor Stravinsky, an absolutely contemporary piece of music that will be contemporary forever. Igor Stravinsky, or oh dang, Daniel Gregory Mason. I know I'm picking. By the 1920s, some string quartets were including the fugue on their programs. Since then, the fugue has steadily gained greatness in the eyes of musicians and performers. The great fugue now seems to me the most perfect miracle in music, says Igor Stravinsky. It is also the most absolutely contemporary piece of music I know, and contemporary forever. Hardly birthmarked by its age, the great fugue is in rhythm alone more subtle than any music of my own century. I love it beyond everything. Pianist Glenn Gould, insane pianist, Canadian. Ooh. For me, the Gross Fugue is not only the greatest work Beethoven ever wrote, but just about the most astonishing piece in musical literature. Some analysts and musicians see the fugue as an early assault on the diatonic tonal system that prevailed in classical music, Beethoven tearing down the structures in place of the world in the 1820s. Robert Kahn sees the main subject of the fugue as a precursor of the tone row, the basis of the 12-tone system developed by Arnold Schoenberg. Okay, so a little bit of background here. The 12-tone technique. Yep. Basically, there's 12 notes on a piano. A, B flat, B, C, C sharp, D, E flat, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp. And you play them all before you repeat any other note. All 12 notes are thus given more or less equal importance, and the music avoids being in a key. Yes. This is what Beethoven was already working on. Beautiful, beautiful. This was developed in in the 1920s, based on, well, maybe not based on, but preceded by the Gross Fugue 100 years earlier. Beethoven, so far out of his time. Your Cradle was Beethoven's Gross Fugue, artist Oskar Kokoschka wrote to Schoenberg in a letter. Ugh, he just stomped on Schoenberg's whole life. Composer Alfred Schnittke quotes the subject in his third string quartet. There have also been numerous orchestral arrangements of the fugue, including by conductors Wilhelm Furtwängler, not a great name in English, but I'm sure it means something nice in German, and Felix Weingartner. Yes, I love the Gross Fugue. It's really hard to listen to. It's long, and the theme is really, it seems very simple, but, and I know that this may be difficult to like view, but it's not very friendly to listen to. It kind of smacks you upside the head whenever you think like, oh, this sounds nice. No, not anymore. But it just goes all over the place. Look, like we have this very, very simple rhythm, and then we get this, and it's so good. Anyway, I've geeked out enough about the Gross Fugue. Let's go back to Beethoven. The third largest crater on Mercury is named in honor of as is the main belt asteroid. 1815 Beethoven. 1815 Beethoven is a carbonaceous background asteroid from the outer regions of the asteroid belt. That's it, kids. Be a famous composer. You'll get a rock in space named after you. And they don't even say why. But it is an uncommon carbonaceous F-type asteroid. Huh? F-type? F-type asteroids have spectra. What? Generally similar to those of B-type asteroids, but lack the water absorbing asteroid spectral types? An asteroid spectral type is assigned to asteroid based on their emission spectrum, color, and sometimes albedo. Is the measure of the diffuse reflection of solar radiation out of the total solar radiation. Okay. The waves that they give off? What is this? All right, so we've got B and F type asteroids, which apparently are the same, but they either have or don't have water in them. And Beethoven is an F type. F for fugue. Or something like that. Why? Why? Okay, this is a much better actual music. Beethoven's music features twice on the Voyager Golden Record, a phonograph record containing a broad sample of images, common sounds, languages, and music of Earth, sent into outer space with the two Voyager probes. Yes, the Voyager Golden Records are two phonograph records that were included aboard both Voyager spacecraft launched in 1977. The records contain sounds and images selected to portray the diversity of life and culture on Earth and are intended for any intelligent extraterrestrial life form who may find them. The records are a sort of time capsule. This is cool. Carl Sagan noted that the spacecraft will be encountered and the record played only if there are advanced spacefaring civilizations in interstellar space. But the launching of this bottle into the cosmic ocean says something very hopeful about life on this planet. Even though there's naught but a blank void in the world, we must be hopeful and send our pioneers, our voyagers into the world. All right. Okay, the musical selection is also varied, featuring works by composers of J.S. Bach. See, Glenn Gould. Glenn Gould, such a good pianist, they sent him into space. Mozart, Beethoven, played by the Budapest String Quartet. But which pieces? The inclusion of Chuck Berry's Johnny B. Goode was controversial, with some claiming that rock music was adolescent, to which Sagan replied, "There are a lot of adolescents on this planet." Yes! Exactly. The Budapest String Quartet. Wow. This is a lot of information on a string quartet. Wow. But maybe it's in the trivia section. My goodness, they've done so much. How do we know what pieces? How do we know what pieces were on there? Jimmy Iovine, very controversial person. Sagan's team wanted to include the Beatles song "Here Comes the Sun" on the record, but the record company EMI, which held the copyrights, declined. I'm sorry, you can't send our music into space. Yeah, that was one of those cases of having to see the tragedy of our planet. Here's a chance to send a piece of music into the distant future just in time and to give it this kind of immortality, and they're worried about money. We got this telegram from EMI saying that it will be $50,000 per record for 2 records. The entire Voyager record cost $18,000 to produce. However, this was denied in 2017 by Timothy Ferris. In his recollection, "Here Comes the Sun" was never considered for inclusion. Interesting. In July 2015, NASA uploaded the audio contents of the record to the audio streaming service SoundCloud. Greetings to the universe. Oh, wow. Wait. Is this... I mean...
阿丹尼什鲁舒姆，
太空朋友，您好，您食饱未？有闲就来阮遮坐哦。
تحياتنا للأصدقاء في النجوم.
Hello from the children of planet Earth.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Bonjour tout le monde. I like it. Where's the other one? Come on. NASA. Black hole sounds. Do they have the section for just the albums? Playlists? Here we go. Sinister sounds of the solar system. Whoever writes this must have a lot of fun. Okay. Golden record, the sounds of Earth. Yeah. This is probably what we want. Give me a second. Okay. That's not what I had in mind. This is not what I had in mind. What? Wait, what? But am I being lied to? Let me turn the music back on. Okay. 206. Golden Record Music List. Here we go. Just check the citations. All right. The first movement of the Fifth Symphony and the string quartet number 13 in B flat, opus 130, Cavatina. They didn't put Grosse Fugue on there. They did not put Grosse Fugue, just the Cavatina, which is the movement before the Grosse Fugue, if you'll recall. The prefix of Van to the surname Beethoven reflects the Flemish origins of the family. The surname suggests that at some stage they lived at or near a beet farm. Ah, so the Beethoven is not actually that wrong. Oh boy. Okay. Well, all right. So we gotta talk about the Ninth Symphony, because that's the big boy. We have 6 minutes until I was going to stop. It is one of the best known works in common practice music. Stands as one of the most performed symphonies in the world. See, this is crazy. 1822 to 1824, he wrote the Ninth Symphony, most performed piece of music in the world, one of the most. And Ode to Joy, everybody knows Ode to Joy. And then 2 years later, he writes the Grosse Fugue, reviled the world over. But every movement of this is just great. The finale, though. So if you don't know about the Ninth Symphony, you have to sit through a lot before you get to the part that everybody knows. Not to say that all of it is unfamiliar, because guess what? If you've watched Neon Genesis Evangelion, you've heard parts of Movement 3 and Movement 4. Because Neon Genesis Evangelion had good music. Bam. Eat it. Take that. Anyway, the choral finale is Beethoven's musical representation of universal brotherhood based on the Ode to Joy theme. Ode to Joy. So the Ode to Joy theme, the poem was written earlier, but when he wrote it, he was trying to invoke the simple melodic structures of hymns. You might recall at this time in his life, he was studying a lot of the music of Bach, who wrote Music for God's Sake. And very important, very, very important. He drew on that for inspiration. This theme, which right, he wanted to create an original hymn, and dang, he did a good job. At about 24 minutes in length, the last movement is the longest of the 4 movements. Indeed, it is longer than some entire symphonies of the classical era. Yeah, that's the thing they don't tell you about Papa Haydn and his 108 symphonies. That can't be right. Wikipedia, tell me Haydn had Haydn people. What? Haydn? There we go. Haydn. How many symphonies? The father of the symphony. Yeah, I'm sure. No, some of his symphonies are very short. 106. 106. I was close. 108, 106. 6 and 8 look like each other. But some of those symphonies were very short. They were almost like lunch pieces, right? You're done dancing, and so the band pulled up a symphony to play over lunch. Or maybe like you could think of it like an after dinner event, right? You know, you don't want it to be too long. You've got other flirtatious, noble, classical era noble things to do. The form, well, that's not very, yeah. So it's complex. It goes through a lot of different things. But essentially, he wrote a symphony within a symphony. The final movement is a symphony within a symphony, played without interruption. This inner symphony follows the same overall pattern as the Ninth Symphony of the whole, with 4 movements. Theme and variations with a slow introduction, scherzo in a 6/8 military style, slow section with a new theme, and fugato finale. Fugato, which is fugue. This is all fugue. It all comes back to this. Look, he basically wrote the symphony within the symphony. The last movement of the ninth is also a symphony in itself, and it is so good. It is perfect theming. It pays tribute to the old. It brings out the new, and it unifies. It has the meaning that he strove for in his heroic period. The fourth movement of the Ninth Symphony, I would say, is the most quintessential Beethoven piece, because he essentially sums up his entire life, all the work he's done, everything he's strived for, technical proficiency, deep meaning, pushing boundaries, tributes to the old, hope for the new. He pushes all of this into the fourth movement, and it's just so good. Music critics almost universally consider the Ninth Symphony as one of Beethoven's greatest works and among the greatest musical works ever written. The finale, however, had its detractors. Early critics rejected the finale as cryptic and eccentric, the product of a deaf and aging composer. Look at this. Just like the Gross Fugue, even in his most beloved work, the greatest musical work of all time, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, Movement 4, they couldn't handle it. So ahead of his time. Verdi admired the first three movements, but lamented the confused structure and the bad writing for the voices in the last movement. Well, okay, I've talked to a lot of singers who have sung the chorus parts of the Ninth Symphony, fourth movement, and they don't have kind things to say about Beethoven's choice in voicing things. But it is still an excellent piece of music. Nobody's perfect. It is still so good and encapsulates all of the ideas that Beethoven had over the course of his life. The Alpha and Omega is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Marvelous in the first three movements, very badly set in the last. No one will ever approach the sublimity of the first movement, but it will be an easy task to write as badly for voices as in the last movement. And supported by the authority of Beethoven, they will all shout, "That's the way to do it." He's a trendsetter. He was even before the Ninth Symphony. Because of his heroic period, people heard that music and they felt things, and not just the urge to eat lunch or dance or go do flirty, noble things in palace bushes. No, they had feelings about music. And supported by the authority of Beethoven, they all shouted, "This is the way to do it." Fortunately, Verdi's prediction did not come true, and singers made a lot of strides in making music singable for future singers. At least until the 20th century, when 12-tone music and avant-garde and all that just exploded onto the scene, and the world of singers suddenly became very, very difficult. Notable performances. See, this is a great piece of music. You know it's a great piece of music when they say it's not just the piece of music, it's the we have to know who debuted it everywhere. The British premiere, 1825, a year after its German debut. I would imagine it's German debut, right? Premiere in Vienna. So, not Germany, but oh, here's the good story. This is in the movie. There's a movie about Beethoven with Gary Oldman. There are a number of anecdotes about the premiere of the Ninth. Based on the testimony of the participants, there are suggestions that it was under-rehearsed. There were only 2 full rehearsals, and rather scrappy in execution. On the other hand, the premiere was a great success. In any case, Beethoven was not to blame, as violist Joseph Bohm recalled. Beethoven himself conducted, that is, he stood at the front of a conductor's stand and threw himself back and forth like a madman. At one point he stretched to his full height, and next he crouched down to the floor. He flailed about with his hands and feet as if he wanted to play all the instruments and sing all the chorus parts. The actual direction was in Louis Duport's hands. We musicians followed his baton only. So they had two conductors. Beethoven on the stand, making a damn fool of himself, and Louis Duport saving the day. When the audience applauded, testimonies differ whether it was the end of the scherzo or the symphony itself. Beethoven was several bars off and still conducting. He was pretty much completely deaf at that point. Because of that, the contralto, Caroline Unger, walked over and turned Beethoven around to accept the audience cheers and applause. According to the critic for the Theater Zeitung, the public received the musical hero with the utmost respect and sympathy, listened to his wonderful, gigantic creations with the most absorbed attention, and broke out in jubilant applause, often during sections and repeatedly at the end of them. The audience acclaimed him through standing ovations 5 times. 5 times he had to come back out before they stopped clapping. There were handkerchiefs in the air, hats, and raised hands so that Beethoven, who could not hear the applause, could at least see the ovations. Basically, they were at the, witnessing the birth of the legend. And look at this. Look at the language. Musical hero. He's a hero. Even already, he's seen as kind of the grandfather, the titan of music. It's insane. It's an insane piece of music. Yes. So we got to know where everyone debuted it at. But this is a pretty actually cool one. In 1998, Japanese conductor Seiji Ozawa conducted the 4th movement for the 1998 Winter Olympics opening ceremony with 6 different choirs simultaneously singing from Japan, Germany, South Africa, China, the United States, and Australia. So basically, a choir from every continent. Well, I mean, if you count Americas as one continent and China and Japan is separate, which they probably would appreciate that. And actually, yeah. So, the recording of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is 79 minutes long. And when they were first making CDs, there was a debate what size to make the CDs in order to fit what amount of music. Because obviously, bigger CD, more space on the compact disc for more music. But you don't want it too big, right? And they decided on the size of the CD at around 80 minutes so that one CD could hold the entirety of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. No kidding. That is how the size of a CD was decided. And then we talk about influence. Influence. We don't really have time for this. I wish we could. There's just so much to talk about. It's so good. But you see, it is time to depart. I think the message from Beethoven here, the true message from Beethoven is that don't let crises make you quit. Reinvent yourself. Pull from the past, look to the future, and write a really, really cool symphony. I'm still working on that last one. Please check me out on Twitter and YouTube for more knowledge of humans. Obviously, today was not so much me reading Wikipedia as was commenting on Wikipedia, but that's okay. I love this stuff. So back in, I think I mentioned this on an earlier stream, but in Monster World, we don't get a whole lot of internet, but we do get radio. from the human world. So I know a lot of music. Anyway, I think it's about time for us to part ways. And so, dear humans, I will see you next time when we will explore more of human culture. Adios. Or wait, I should do a German send off. What's Auf Wiedersehen?